The motion be agreed to. The Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Speaker, Labor will support the first reading of this bill and its reference to Select Committee, but that is as far as I am able to commit our support. Hindsight and some distance from the pressure of ministerial deadlines, I find it hard to recall actually why we need to have trustees performing what is now clearly defined in this bill as the role of the middleman. And I actually think that there are way more important issues in terms of securities law that we have to be getting on with, and this is not the top priority for the government. And I am extremely disappointed to find out that we have an early report back foisted on us by decree in the House. I am the chair of the Commerce Select Committee, and I haven't even been told that there is a report back date expected of this bill, one of the most significant bills that we've had to address as part of the regulatory reform in this area, of the 30th of June. I don't know if my deputy chair had been informed of that, but it would have been nice for a phone call just to be informed that that was the minister's desire. I totally oppose that. This is a far more important issue than that would allow. That means that we can only allow less than 6 weeks for the calling of submissions. We'll have to hear the submissions very, very quickly, and then we'll have to be in a position of reporting back to the House by the 30th of June. I don't think that is right and fair to the investors of New Zealand who have felt utterly and completely hammered by the lack of regulation in this area. And regulation quickly doesn't actually... I remember asking the Securities Commission the question at a select committee earlier this year about whether we needed trustees anymore, whether the role of the trustee corporation, having been exposed by the Companies Office to the Select Committee last year as having really failed abysmally in its obligations to investors. I remember asking them, is this the role of the middleman that we now have? Why wouldn't we just beef up the role of the Securities Commission? And of course the Securities Commission were not in a position to respond to that, but what they did say was that that was what happened in Australia in 1999. So they did away with the trustee corporations as the middlemen, and ASIC has the control of the supervision of the non-finance, non-bank deposit-taking sector. So the finance companies are covered by ASIC and not by individual trustee corporations. And maybe the events of the past 4 years should demand something a little bit better of the government and of this House than the simply tightening the supervision of the supervisors instead of beefing up the role of the Securities Commission and an exponential increase in its powers, because I favour that. I actually think our Securities Commission needs more teeth. I think that our Securities Commission needs more resources in order to take on the demands that it has in this very, very difficult market. The government has already announced that it will look at the super regulator that was proposed by the Capital Markets Development Task Force. And yet this golden opportunity to look at one aspect of the supervisory regime is being completely squandered by this bill. Completely squandered by this bill. And then to say that we have to report back by the 30th of June is just like adding insult to injury. It is absolutely unreasonable for this House to be debating this issue under these kinds of pressures. It is far, far too important. And actually, when did this bill get tabled? When was this bill tabled? I think it was tabled in Parliament on the 15th of December last year. Well, we're already in March this year. If it was so important, if the time frame was so tight, why didn't the Minister put it up the order paper earlier on in the year and we could have got on with it before now? Mr Speaker, I think that all of the people who will be wanting to make submissions on this important bill will be appalled at the government's arrogance and their lack of respect to the people involved in this industry, allowing such a short time for it to be considered by our Select Committee and then ultimately reported back to the House. The early report back on the bill we already have has excited enormous unfavourable comment from the financial sector, and my view is that we actually have to take the time to get the legislative framework right. This is far too important to allow for a once-over lightly response, which is actually what this government seems to find acceptable. Mr Speaker, what has happened in New Zealand should be a warning to us all. And I admit, I was the Minister of Commerce at the time that our finance companies failed. But at the time they were failing, at the very beginning, I was already in the process of regulating the financial sector. The review of financial products and providers was already out for consultation before the first of the first three fell over in 2006. And I, of course, announced the main decisions arising out of the review of financial products and providers in June 2007, a matter of days before Bridgecourt fell over. And then, of course, it was like a set of dominoes, a house of cards. They all came tumbling down, and not surprising because, of course, it's not like a run on the bank. These people had their money invested in term deposits, and they sat there holding their breaths, waiting for that term to expire, and then they pulled their money out. The reinvestment rates plummeted, and that's why we had the crisis on our hands. And, of course, getting people to reinvest in that environment was something that a number of them tried to continue to do, even though they knew that their companies were on the brink of failure. And that is criminal and it is unacceptable. And I think that the behaviour of individuals, and I said this last week in a speech that I gave as I launched my private members bill, the behaviour of people out there, we should be ashamed of some of the people who call themselves our top business leaders, who were prepared to actually allow people to invest their money knowing full well that they would never see the light of day again. And as for the moratoria that were imposed on a number of unwitting individuals, I mean, how can people in this House seriously think that people who didn't have enough financial acumen to make the right decision in terms of the original investment, how on earth were they going to make the right decision around moratoria? And we've seen the results of that. And look at, I remember when the Securities Commission came to the Select Committee and we asked them about the moratoria, they said that people were in a state of shock, that they actually could not allow for the totality of the loss to crystallise by actually agreeing to a receivership, and that's why they agreed to moratoria. I am saying this is not good enough to the government, and we should be working together collaboratively to regulate the sector appropriately. Last year we received that report from the Registrar's Office, and he made it very clear what it was that was the problem. He said there was a lack of capability and capacity. He talked about weak trustees. He talked about a lack of role clarity. He talked about the potential for a lack of independence from the issuer, and he talked about weak accountability. Not good enough. This is an indictment on the people who ordinary investors were entitled to rely on, and they could not. The supervisors, subject to a tighter supervisory regime of their own, doesn't fix the underlying problem. This bill has no regulatory impact statement published with it, so I've gone away and I've printed it off. And I think it's utterly inadequate, and I think that's why the government doesn't want to print its regulatory impact statements in the bills in the House anymore. There are only three options put here: 2007 proposals, the central regulator, and this one. The central regulator gets the benefit of 3 paragraphs. Now, in Australia, they have a central regulator, and this is what I want to ask the government to think seriously about. Look at Australia. look at the Financial Services Authority in the UK, who run 11 principles for business. And I know that I'm going to run out of time to list all of the principles for business, but essentially a firm must conduct its business with integrity. A firm must conduct its business with due skill, care and diligence. A firm must take reasonable care to organise and control its affairs responsibly and effectively with